Hello and welcome to what I think will prove to be a really fascinating hour, a stream, more than a stream though. We're joined by several experts in the field, people who are brilliant musicians, people who are instrumental in making Leicester the city it is and with the reputation it's got all across the UK. Music in response to COVID-19 is the title of this, what we've learnt and where we're going. It's all part of the Cultural Exchanges Festival for 2021, which is an annual festival of ideas, all brought together by De Montfort University, of course. So I'm going to begin, of course, by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So Lucy, shall we start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lucy. I work for Help Musicians, where I'm the head of the creative programme. I have worked with Help Musicians for about 4.5 years now, with a leading UK charity, independent charity, which provides a lifetime of support to musicians up and down the UK, at all career stages, in all genres of music, across creative development needs, physical and health needs, and also wellbeing.
I bet a year ago you never thought you'd be helping people as much as this, did you?
Not quite as much as we have in the last year.
Absolutely. Leonie.
Hello. Hi. So I guess I'm here because I'm an independent arts and music events curator. I've been putting on events in Leicester kind of at a grassroots level for many years, and involving lots of diverse communities and for diverse audiences as well. Really getting down on in the underground scene, which is kind of the place where I love to be, and where like the new cool stuff happens. I've been involved in lots of events, which have given me experience to put on an event last year when we were in lockdown as well. So kind of in between the time when we were all allowed out again and then when we went back in for our second lockdown. So I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about that and kind of what we've learned over that process as well today.
It's great to have you here. We'll talk a bit about how last year went in just a second. Grace.
Hello, my name is Grace Peachtree and I'm a singer-songwriter. I often get called a protest singer. I kind of sing a lot of songs about politics, and I've worked for the past, I don't know, about 15 years in the UK across the kind of DIY sort of folk, punk and comedy scenes. And I suppose I am here to talk about what I've done with my life since gigs were taken away from me.
Yeah, indeed. And Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Dean. I am Senior Events and Marketing Manager at PPL. PPL are the UK's music licensing company for over 120,000 performers and rights holders. So basically, if you have recorded a song or released a song and it's been commercially released, played on radio, having airplay anywhere in public, you need to register PPL and make sure you're getting paid your royalties. And it's my job to ensure that we engage and educate and provide support for our members via lots of events and showcases, all sorts of activity, some of which takes place in Leicester, Handmade Festival, we've supported in the past. And our company PPL PRS, which is a joint venture between PPL and PRS, which collects for the other side of the royalty, which is the songwriter and publisher. Our joint venture, PPL PRS, is based in Leicester, so that is a good link to Leicester.
Indeed. I'm Dean Jackson. I'm from BBC Introducing. I'm based in Nottingham most of the time, but represent the local artists from Leicester and Derby, as well as Nottingham. My pleasure to be here. Congratulations on finding a brilliant background, by the way. I feel really under-backgrounded for this chat, because I'm normally on the radio. Normally people don't see what's around me. So we're going to split this into thirds, really. The first third will be reflecting on, well, what's happened in the last year, really, in terms of how you've coped with it, how you've adapted, what have been the highlights for you, assuming there have been some, and the things that you've needed to navigate to get round to, to stay sane, to stay productive, to do what you need to do, really. And then around 20 past, we'll switch to looking about how 2021 might be better, what we've learnt, how we might take things forward, any assistance that you might need, any ideas that you've got for 2021. And then around 20 to 7, we'll switch to taking questions. So we'll go to a Q&A session. So if you have any questions as we're going through here, feel free to fire them in. And I'm not ignoring if we don't deal with your question anyway. Probably best to fire when you have the idea of waiting until 20 to 7 and that awkward moment when we all think, there are no questions coming in. So send them through as and when you have the idea, and we'll gather them and bring them all out at 20 to 7. So, Leonie, let's go back to you to begin with. How has the last 12 months been for you, and how has it changed the way that you work?
What a great question. It's been difficult, it's been stressful, but I kind of don't like to focus on the negative things. Let's go for positivity today. And it's also been really great to have a fresh start, a new perspective on the industry, on live music, on being a musician, on playing gigs, on audience members. I think the last year has really managed to shine a light on a lot of issues that have kind of been ingrained in the society. And I've kind of used that the kind of negative stuff as a way of starting afresh. So I'm full of creativity and forward planning, looking into the future with hope. And I've managed to put on a couple of events as well. So one on wholly online and also one in real life last summer. Yeah.
So what was the one that you did in real life? That sounds interesting.
Real life. So this was a new idea called Avant Garden, which is basically putting on multidisciplinary events in outdoor spaces. So this is an idea I had before the whole COVID thing came about, and I hadn't really put it into practice. But it was a really good opportunity to do an outdoor event, an outdoor gig really. So kind of like a mini pop-up festival type vibe. The main things that came out of that was just doing it safely, as safe as possible. It wasn't, no point in putting on something at that time if it wasn't going to be safe for everyone, if people didn't feel safe coming, if the artist didn't feel safe playing. So it took a lot of planning, a lot of commitment from a great team, and also used it as an opportunity to again refresh the way of thinking of how do we put live music on. So I created a kind of Q&A with the artists and the people involved in putting the event on, to kind of get those best practices going for that event, and something that we can use in the future as a model for live events. Simply stuff like, how do you want the stage to look? What would you feel like if you were coming to watch this show? Like, just involving the artists in the creative process of putting a live event on. So yeah, a really new approach to putting gigs on for me. That's what last year brought about.
And I'm interested to know how that COVID secure gig went, because I've been to one. It was an indoor gig actually, and not I'm going to make it about me because it's about you, but the one that I went to, I arrived and the atmosphere was quite daunting actually. It was people wearing masks, very spaced out in terms of their geographical location. And when I walked in, I thought there's no way there's going to be an atmosphere here, but actually I was really pleasantly surprised by how badly people needed to see live music, and indeed how they responded to it. Is that your story as well?
Definitely. I come from a background where I think music, especially live music, is just community. And I think when we put Avant Garden on, it came at a time when people were really missing out on that community aspect of live music. Everyone that attended was followed the rules perfectly. So thankfully we had a great outdoor venue. It was in the bottom of a garden of a pub in Leicester. Thankfully the weather held out, so the sun was shining. And it didn't rain, which was very important for the gig. And we had, loads of safety guidelines in place that we'd taken inspiration from people like Musicians Union, which put a great package together off the government website. So we managed to put on a really safe gig. Everyone was seated outside, apart wearing the mask, got sanitisation, had my little hand warmers going, you know, stuff like, and logistically, like microphones getting swapped out as well, people wearing gloves to change kit around, things like that. So I think we did it in the best possible way. That gig was also streamed online as well, so I'm thinking about expanding audiences in that way. So which I'm sure we'll talk about in the second part of what we've learned through the processes. Yeah, I think it was a really successful event, and I had a lot of feedback saying people felt really safe. I'm very grateful that we managed to put on anything at all.
We'll get into some of the detail a little bit later on, if you don't mind. So I think a lot of people would really love to learn from your experiences. But the one question that springs to mind at the moment for me is, you've done one of these. If, God forbid, this thing goes on, how frequently could you run that sort of event?
Again, a great question. I think obviously we have to look at spaces that we can put gigs on safely. Unfortunately, we're kind of limited to what the council allows in our local areas, what venues are available and open, and the staff they have to run, because putting on something safely in these times, it takes a lot more effort than just showing up at a gig, at a venue that's got a stage set up. There's so much more that goes into it for an outdoor event, such as staging, getting the right sound equipment. For our event, we actually had a battery powered PA system, which was amazing, that one of my friends built.
How long does that last for?
It's pretty hefty batteries, so
Wow.
it managed to last the whole time. Yeah. Yeah, we had a pretty long extension cord running from the pub down the garden. So things like that, like technical aspects that people don't realise go into putting on an event. Those are all the, like, logistical things we have to keep in mind. So for you know, I think it wouldn't be as regular as just showing up like on a Friday night, for example, unless we had a set space. But doing these kind of pop-up events, yeah, take a lot more time and planning than one might think. I bet. Yeah.
Okay, we'll look at some of those aspects a little bit later on, if we may, because I think you know, key to going forward is learning from you and how that event went, and things that we could be simplified, or that are transferable or shared or whatever. So we'll definitely return to that a little bit later on. Grace, as a musician, what's the year been like for you?
Different. It's been very different. I mean, it was for me, it was really one extreme to the other, because when COVID sort of hit in quite a big way, I was on tour in Australia, and I was kind of coming to the end of the tour, but there was that period of it was about 48 hours where it kind of went from feeling, you know, it's like the kind of act one of the horror movie where, you know, they've spoken a little bit about the kind of the big monster, and then suddenly it's kind of everywhere. And there was about 48 hours between thinking, oh, this sounds quite serious, to then the festival we were due to play at for our final weekend in Australia was cancelled on the morning of the festival. And then we were in the position, it was me and my fiddle player, were in a position quite suddenly of making the decision hour by hour of, you know, can we even afford to stay in Australia for the next 3 days to get our original flights home, or will they actually have been cancelled by then? And making the decision that actually, yeah, we kind of need to get out of Dodge pretty sharpish. So we ended up changing our flights and coming home 3 days early, which was the right thing to do, because we would probably still be in Australia now if we hadn't done that. So it was kind of, we kind of went from, and obviously the middle of the winter here is the middle of the summer there, so we kind of went from this massive folk festival, you know, kind of people everywhere, you know, packed out stages, packed out marquees, and to then suddenly being home and staying there for months and months and months and months and not seeing anybody. So it was a real yeah, kind of one extreme to the other. It was a very surreal experience to all happen within kind of a few days. And then, I mean, I was very, very lucky. I will say that I thank my lucky stars, to be honest. I don't know how he feels about it, but my fiddle player, Ben, actually got kind of stuck here in my house, and he was kind of between places at the time, and he planned to get a house when we got back from Australia. And as it was, he just kind of bunked up with me for the entirety of lockdown. So we were able to kind of do a lot of music together. We did a lot of live stream stuff. we kind of started as a bit of a joke. We started a series of doing a different cover song a day for each letter of the alphabet, and we did that through March and April. And I think people were just so bored that, you know, by the end, everybody was kind of really engaged in that, and that felt really nice because it sounds kind of daft, but just to have a reason to kind of, you know, do something in the day, you know, at least every day we were like, well, we've got to kind of work out another song, we've got to arrange this song, we've got to film it, we've got to post it. And I think we would have probably gone crackers if we hadn't, you know, just come up with something to do. So it's very, very, very surreal. I mean, I've been gigging, like I said, for about 15 years. So this is the longest I've ever been in one place in my adult life. It's been a very big adjustment.
I mean, the fact that you can't gig, the fact that you haven't stood on a stage and seen the whites of the eyes of an audience, I mean, how has that impacted on you, Grace?
I mean, I think that, you know, I will say that I've said all along that I'm tremendously lucky the position that I'm in, and as it turns out, obviously I couldn't have known this was going to be the case, but I ended up touring sort of double the amount I was due to in 2019. That's just the way things fell. I kind of ended up with tour after tour. So I actually sort of did 2 years worth of gigs in 2019, which meant that if this had happened to me at any other point in my career, I would have been completely and utterly, you know, financially in real trouble. But so you kind of, the whole way through, you're sort of constantly aware that I've really got to thank my lucky stars, you know, and it's been much more difficult for a lot of other people. But I was really surprised at the mental impact, I think. Really surprised, actually. You know, I'm kind of somebody who have been very fortunate not to really struggle with mental health issues much in my life. But I think really realizing how much I personally draw from shows, that, you know, how much that connection, as you say, you know, seeing people, you know, their kind of faces in front of you. I mean, and we've made the best that we can out of live streaming. And again, I'm sure we'll get on to talking about that. But I think really realizing how much I need to bounce off the people, you know, and it's not about numbers. You know, I've done some shows in my life that I've done one show to one person in my life, and that was, you know, but it's just about the fact that there's somebody there. You know, I think for me, gigs are first and foremost a communion. You know, I think that's the most important thing to me, that it's a point of connection between you know, however many people in the room, and the idea that not being able to see that impact, I think, took its toll on me, I think.
And in terms of your songwriting, how has that been affected by this? Because my concern was that by December, you know, the music was coming out, it was all going to be about the perils of lockdown and how it felt. It hasn't quite worked out like that, but how has it impacted on your writing?
Well, hey, I'm loath to break it to you, Dean, but I'm the exception to the rule. I've got a song about lockdown, which is probably the best thing I've written in the year. But I think for me personally, like it's a really interesting contradiction, I think, because being a musician is a wonderful, amazing kind of privileged position to be in, to do it for a living. It's not something I ever thought I'd ever be able to do. I never thought I would be able to get to the point where I was paying my rent from gigs. But for me personally, I'm the only person I can speak for, it has a strange effect of kind of suddenly you feel like your whole life is touring, and that's not a very universal experience. And your aim as a songwriter is to try and find the universal. You're trying to write things that people relate to at the end of the day. And a lot of people can't relate to, you know, oh, yet another gig, another service station dinner, another travel lodge. You know, it's not a very universal experience. And that is something, ironically, that when I was on the road so much in 2019, I was finding it really hard to write anything that I felt like would mean anything to anybody else. And now, you know, there's arguably nothing more universal than this thing that has happened literally to the whole world, and it's happened to us at the same time. And I think, you know, there's not to be too pretentious about it, but especially when it first hit, I think there was a lot of political messages to be taken from it. I think, you know, it made a lot of us reassess an awful lot, you know, about what we think of as essential work, what's important in life, you know, the the way that we think about money. You know, like there was a long time, I think, where we're all kind of in this capitalist society where we think money is kind of the most important thing, and at the end of the then suddenly when something happens that completely transcends money, I know that sounds like a very naive thing to say, then I think suddenly people in my street were, the neighbors were talking to each other for the first time. Everybody in my street was kind of offering help to people, and I think in many ways took us back to a really fundamental sense of community, and that I think there is a lot to write about in that. There's a lot of beauty to be found in that, I think.
So is there quite a wealth of material, a number of songs that have come out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I can't vouch for the quality, but the quantity's there.
I'll vouch for the quality. Sarah, what's worked for you this year, and what have you noticed with your your broad perspective of musicians? You mentioned the number of musicians that you kind of work with and represent, and what sort of trends have you seen coming out in the past 12 months?
Well, I guess what's worked and how many musicians we represent and record labels is probably the first thing to address, is that it was so important for PPL to just continue to provide an unfaltering service in terms of being able to literally be able to pay performers, because all the employees of PPL move into their bedrooms. We needed to make sure that distributions were being made, because artists across the business, musicians and labels, were losing revenue streams like left, right and centre. So it was so important that we kind of not only made that happen, but we pulled it forward to make it happen sooner as well than our usual distributions. And then I guess specifically to my job, is literally my job to connect and interact with people. So that was kind of turned on its head, and we've just had to explore different modes of technology, different ways of connecting and educating people and reaching them, with those kind of geographic barriers lifted, if you like, I suppose, because it's been easier to connect with people in many ways. I know we'll get onto the positives in a second, but it's also been really integral for us. A big part of what PPL do is ensuring that we're donating to in the industry and are supporting our industry. And so we've continued our donations to the PPL Momentum Fund, which is run through PRS Foundation, and the International Showcase Fund, which I understand is probably sounds like an anomaly because it's an international showcase, but it was important that we look at ways of artists, especially developing artists, of continuing to develop. And with the last 10 months, kind of any sort of momentum that they had grown through radio play, through touring in the UK, all put on pause without being able to play these essential kind of showcases to get their leg up and into other territories. So that fund has pivoted, and it's allowing applications for artists to play at virtual showcases and to fund those virtual showcases to ensure they're export ready in those ways. With the PPL Momentum Fund, we've still supported 55 artists across 2020 to continue their careers, but obviously all of what they're doing is it's different. It's in a COVID adapted way. So whereas before part of their application might be, this is to fund a 15-day tour, blah, 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 it's to fund just different elements of keeping creative and sustaining creativity.
And how did these showcase events go? Who were you showcasing to?
So for the International Showcase Fund, it's things like Eurosonic, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Yeah. And South by Southwest, which is in March. So, for example, for South by Southwest, the British Music Embassy, which is the central hub for British artists performing in Austin, if it were happening, that is all obviously being streamed. And the artists are recording in a COVID-safe environment. Everyone's being tested. There's a COVID safety officer present. And this is all pre-recorded and then broadcast through the British Music Embassy's channel on South by Southwest. This is coming up in March, obviously. So yeah, it will still be a great opportunity for artists, for British artists, to export to the rest of the world. And it's for industry, it's for delegates, it's for labels, it's for every type of industry.
And do you think those artists have to do something differently now to capture the attention of the people that they want to appeal to, compared to if they're standing on an actual stage in a room with people with a glass of beer in their hand?
I mean, yeah, nothing replaces the sticky beer floors and things that go wrong. But I suppose it's different. It's approached in a different way. I think for something like South by Southwest, it's approached in a let's make this as amazing as it possibly can be, with the best production team and the best sound and the best lighting, and present the artist in the best way that they can be presented, and also content that they can use for other things as well once South by Southwest has happened. So it's kind of that step up from your living room showcase. It's artists going to a production studio and making something brilliant, hopefully.
Lucy, where to start with Help Musicians? I mean, compared to 2019, what sort of help were musicians looking for in 2020?
Oh, what a year. I suppose what 2020 has really brought, it's brought new things for Help Musicians. But prior to, so if I think back 12 months ago, we were starting to hear about the kind of the reality that became the reality in March, if you will. So we were already starting to hear from musicians who were losing work, who were unsure, uncertain about whether they would be able to kind of take forward travel and things like that to do the work of being a musician. And then it, you know, as Grace, you so rightly put it, it just kind of hit. It was suddenly upon us. And at that moment in time, and I think that was the beginnings of March. And we, you know, from an organisational perspective, we've all come home. We've been working from home since March. Very lucky to do so, and it was a real moment for the charity to think about what it was that we could do, and what we needed to do. You know, what's in our remit, what's in our kind of duty of being Help Musicians. It's in our name. We, you know, so we were really agile in those first few weeks. We put together an initial hardship fund, which we've since kind of developed over time. That hardship fund has been phenomenal. It probably isn't even part of it. We've supported about 24,000 musicians through our hardship funding. The initial fund was a very light touch. It was a kind of one-off payment, and then the following kind of iterations of it are looking at longer term support, kind of a monthly payment. And from the health and welfare side of the charity, we worked with musicians in financial hardship. It's one of the many things we do as a charity, but never before have we really responded to such an incredible loss of income and the hardship on musicians that's faced. So, and we've continued throughout the last 10, nearly 11 months now to kind of survey musicians. So making sure that we understand what the real picture is like for musicians. And it's, I won't kind of dwell on the rate. We'll stick with the positives, but a lot of that insight has really shown us just how indiscriminate the need is for musicians, and everything that's been talked about before, that kind of not only the kind of loss of work, the loss of income, the uncertainty, but also the longer term, and some were felt very short term, but kind of the impact on what that means for individuals and for groups and ensembles and orchestras and the kind of breadth of the musician profession. From the creative program, which is the department that I lead, we were able at that point in the year around March to really think about the timeline of funds that we would have had open throughout the year, and to look at making the best use of those funds and those budgets attached to them. So from the creative programs perspective, we've run more rounds of our funds than ever before. pretty much doubled most funds. Where we would have run 2 rounds, we ran 4 last year, and made sure that we tried to make sure that at no point in the year were we kind of dark, that there was nothing to apply for. So we have a number of funds under the creative programme, but predominantly they exist to enable musicians to develop professionally, whether that's through learning and skills development, or through the kind of recording and release of music. We have a fund rather called Do It Differently that previously supported touring activity. So that was a, kind of an immediate kind of thing that we could look at and say, well, unfortunately, that's not, and still not going to be something that we can support. But within those funds really provide, I suppose, when I think of funds, I think of jigsaw pieces and puzzles, because I do the kind of behind the scenes bit, but really making sure that our guidance was clear, that and that we were available as a team who have all gone into a home working world, that we were still available to talk to musicians. So whether that's on email, by phone call, we've done an awful lot of one-to-one kind of development surgeries for applications that we'd done anyway, but we've done more of those. And I suppose through our funding programs, particularly in creative, it's been quite something to see the innovation and the resilience of musicians throughout what's also been a really tough, difficult and challenging time. But it is probably one of the parts of my job that I adore the most, which is seeing the reality of how musicians think and kind of really embrace new ways of working. And it's really brilliant that as a funder, we exist to support musicians to do that. And also a lot of our time over the last 12 months has been spent working with beneficiaries from 2019 and before, thinking about helping those beneficiaries, those musicians, to think about how they might use our funding that we made. Say we gave a grant at the end of 2019 to go on tour, and that tour no longer exists. So really working on an individual one-on-one basis with lots and lots of musicians, just to help them navigate the uncertainty and to come through it with hopefully some glimmer of positivity. We also work with business advisors with our Do It Differently and our Mobo funds. And those individuals, those kind of music industry professionals, have been a complete lifeline, I think, to many of our musicians, just in that kind of, what do I do? How do I approach streaming a gig? How will I think about my business model differently? Is now the time to go and get new merch? How can I continue to kind of build and grow my audience? So in spite of the difficulties, I've always said, and I will always say, I'm really proud to work for Help Musicians, always have been. And I think last year for us was just, I suppose, a year where I came home from work, I'm in my living room, I would sort of close down my laptop and just think, we really are making a difference. And it's, for us this year, it's really thinking kind of longer term. So how do we continue to support musicians over the next 6 months, 12 months? How does that return to work kind of start to feel? What will it look like? What will have changed? And also, really importantly, how do we support musicians with their well-being, with their mental health, as a result of such a
has it become
time?
Has it become a real issue?
Yeah, well, I think we've done a lot of surveys and a lot of research over the years. We have a service called Music Minds Matter, which has been in existence for a couple of years. I think within the first 2 quarters of last year, that we'd seen an increase, a 25% increase to that service. As I say, when we've surveyed musicians, we hear a lot about anxiety. We hear a lot about, the real day-to-day, kind of worries about not being able to pay household bills, not being able to pay rent. Lots of musicians worried about the kind of viability of their careers in the future, with lots of questions about, what will it look like? Not to sort of quote those figures, but kind of significant numbers of musicians that are really in a kind of, an unknown place at the moment.
Yeah, sure. I will continue just a second. We'll look at what we've learned and how we might move forward. I just want to just name check a few people just to reassure you that your questions are coming through. So hello, Elise, I see your question. We'll get to that in a minute. Christina as well, Steve, Michael as well, and Patricia, got your questions here. There are more coming through all of the time. Fire them onto the feed and we'll get to them probably in around, I imagine around 10 minutes time, perhaps just a little bit more. So by all means, if you've got questions, if thoughts are coming into your head as you're listening to what the panel is saying, fire them through and we'll get to them a little bit later on. Now, rather than go around all four of you, I'm going to fire a few things out now about where we go from here and to just get your thoughts really. So streaming gigs, will that be something? So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that in June we're back to normal gigs in venues, maybe even festivals. Who knows? It'd be great to stand in a field, wouldn't it, at some point this year? When we go back to that, what feels like a utopian vision now, will you continue to stream gigs? Do you think?
Who's that for?
Grace, you answer it because you've had a big live stream gig. So would you continue to stream gigs?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've done, I think, about 4 or 5 big live streams over the course of since April. And I'd say that, so John Helps, who put at least me forward for this panel, and I think was instrumental in organising all this, who I'm very deeply lucky to have as the manager of my career and life. He kind of worked with me to make those happen, and we kind of agreed that we learned a lot each time, and each one I think was better. And I think that, you know, obviously the more you kind of do things, the more in the groove you get with them. I think that for me, like the major thing that was a massive, made a massive difference was being able to read the comments as they come in. You know, to have a laptop right there as I'm playing, it was almost like talking to an audience and have them talking back. And I think, you know, obviously, like I said, I played a bit in Australia, so I've got some folks. It was really nice to see some people saying like, oh, you know, I'm tuning in from Australia, and obviously that's, you know, obviously also in terms of accessibility issues. I mean, in the normal times outside of the plague, I do try and play in disabled accessible venues, but obviously it's definitely something that I'll look at. I think including at least one live stream per tour, I think in the future, because again, it's just an option for people who can't come to a show to be able to experience the tour. So it's definitely something I'm going to kind of stick with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The accessibility side of things, everything that I put on, I try to make it as accessible as possible. So either people that don't want to go to a bar, for example, or have different issues. I think everything that I do from now on, I'll try to stream it in some way as well, or at least record it and then put it online afterwards. I think that's going to be a big change for me personally going forward. I guess going back to the idea that music is community, putting something online and we've got the means to, just extends that outreach, extends the community, keeps conversations flowing after the gig as well. So I think that's going to be a really important aspect going forward, and a really positive thing to come out of you know, these really difficult times. I think also for the industry, creating more opportunities for work. Obviously you need videographers, editors, people to do sound recording, those kind of things. So I think it's really positive in that way as well, and to create opportunities for creative opportunities for people, and to keep those creative industries going. Yeah.
Really interested to know in terms of, because I think most musicians have streamed at some point during the pandemic. Seeing gigs that have more than one artist playing are a bit scarcer. But I'm just thinking, in terms of whether you've staged a gig or whether you've just watched a really good performance online, what really works for streaming, do you think? What makes a really good stream over one that's just different from the you've got in the background and becomes a little bit wallpapery? Which are the really good things, the good techniques to employ?
Well, maybe Grace, you can answer this as well. I think from an artist perspective, I think it's, like you said, the communion between an artist and an audience. If the artist knows that they're performing to a camera as well as an in-person audience, or maybe just a camera. I've been in the background of a gig where that happened. Shout out to Luke Broughton, who I'm sure you guys will know. So I was there at his Firebook stream, and it was literally just him on a stage singing to a camera. which was a crazy experience. It was just me and the technician there. But I think, yeah, it's engagement, I think, is like the difference between a really good stream and one that might not be so good. Obviously, we're very used to seeing music on YouTube, for example, now. So as audiences, we're used to watching music all the time. So that little level of like maybe communication as you're doing a performance to an audience that you're expecting to be watching you, those kind of things kind of set stuff apart, I think. Maybe
yeah, you're right. There's just sorry,
Lucy.
No, Lucy.
I think as an audience member, I'd agree. I think that the ways of engaging with a musician who may be playing in their own home, playing in a venue under kind of COVID safe means, we've certainly seen in musicians we've funded and musicians we've not funded, just musicians I know, certainly that kind of being able to test some things with, you know, whether it's sharing things like voice notes, the kind of collaborative process, particularly for new material. There's a kind of rawness that's back with sort of self-made videos, home recording, that does feel like there are ways to create that two-way energy. They're just really different. And I think once you, probably as a musician, once you buy into doing them and as you buy into it as an audience member, it won't replace being in a field or in a, you know, on some sticky floors with a pint kind of being bashed into you. It's never quite going to be that, but also it's not that. You know, sometimes it's not some of those things. It's not queuing for the loo or anything like that. But yeah, I think that engagement, that kind of being able to kind of see a process, engage with the musician, see something about them that you wouldn't necessarily get if they were on a stage in a venue.
I think there's also been a really good element of seeing people break down or deconstruct what a music venue or what a venue could be. You know, musicians are not constrained to playing in a 100-cap venue, wherever it may be. They could go and play in a cave like Jarvis Cocker did and get quite creative with where they're going to go. I mean, not everyone has a cave on their doorstep, but you could go and play in a wider array of locations, and I think that adds a different element into getting to know the musician and kind of a different element of their creativity, I suppose, as well.
I've really loved. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Grace.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think for me the thing that made the most difference was Leonie, like you said, we're so used to watching music online, and I think we're so used to watching pre-recorded video. And for me, the thing that made the biggest difference, I was part of a kind of Zoom comedy show that was hosted by Kira Pritchard McLean, who did this series of weekly comedy gigs. And a couple of people asked her, you know, will this be available to watch after the show's finished? And she was really hardline about saying, no, you know, this is a gig. Like, if you came to a show, then you wouldn't be able to go back and be at the show after the show had finished, and this is about us all experiencing a communal thing at one moment. And that made an enormous difference to me, the idea that everybody was actually experiencing one thing, you know, from wherever they were. And I just to agree with you, Lucy, I think the lo-fi-ness, I think, has been a real wonderful thing to see. I mean, you know, Frank Turner's been doing some amazing live streams from his house, and, you know, to see somebody of that kind of level, you know, who you would normally see in the most polished possible way, you know, who you're kind of used to seeing on TV and on massive stages, to see him kind of basically with an acoustic guitar, basically playing in front of his laptop, is a completely different type of intimacy, I think, between audience and artist. And obviously, like I think for loads of reasons in the current musical world, you know, that relationship is the key, isn't it? That's the most important thing. None of us can survive without that relationship between us and the audience.
I've quite liked getting to know musicians in the same way. I mean, if you go to a gig very often, you'll find you'll get 30 seconds of an insight while someone's tuning up. You know, they're doing that. They're just fiddling with the guitar while they give a bit of background to kill time. But I think actually it's been really interesting to see musicians learning to speak as well between. I mean, some of them are naturally brilliant at it. I mean, Grace, you've always been great at it. But lots of musicians don't speak at gigs. They go from one track to the next to the next. And I think it's been really fascinating to see them discussing not even necessarily the music, but their ideas and how they're feeling. I think it's built a real connection in a way that we haven't seen with musicians before. Right, more questions we'll move on to the public questions in just a second. As we're now in 2021, I'm just wondering, well, two things, and I'd like all of you to kind of chip into this, please. Firstly, do you have anything planned for 2021? I know we're only in January, there's a lot of it still to go. But secondly, what have you learned from the grimness of 2020 that will change the way you do things for good, do you think? So shall we start with, Leonie, let's start with you again.
Me, hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a little bit of bad connection here. I've got loads of plans for 2021. I'm opening up a new venue. I'm going to shout out to Bishop Street Methodist Church, where I've been working for the last couple of years in the gallery. It's a great alternative venue in Leicester as well. It's a dry venue, obviously. If you don't know it, it's on the Town Hall Square in a 19th century chapel. If you've been to any of Handmade Festival was there, gigs that the Robot News Home have put on, I've been there as well. And I'm really excited to kind of open up that venue this year, hopefully in person. And the thing that I've learnt from last year, I think just like to touch on 2020 as kind of giving us time to think. You know, we were forced to take time out, really. And I was forced to think about how I want to move forward in the music industry. For me, music's not just entertainment. I think it can be very much a therapeutic device, a kind of lifesaver at times. I think that's why people are missing live music so much as well. As audience members or artists, it's something that we use to cope with life. And when we need it most, you know, it's really, really difficult that we can't have that at the moment. So things that I'm planning, I'm planning a Women in Experimental Music Festival, which is really close to my heart. I'm an experimental musician and I'm a woman. So I'm looking forward to putting that on, and that will feature local artists and also artists from further afield. We're also working on doing some new recording sessions as well. So kind of inviting artists to come and record sessions, stream sessions. So using the skills that we've learned from last year in very much going forward. And again, providing those opportunities. So one thing I've really noticed is that gap between, I guess, using live music as social activism in a way, so challenging you know, issues that we're facing in society. So opening up opportunities for people to come and learn whilst we put in events on, that's a big thing for me. Closing those gaps in industry between, you know, certain demographics. So yeah, looking towards the future with all positive stuff, and I really hope that we can see each other again soon.
I hope so.
Sorry
to interrupt you, if we just quickly, because I'm acutely aware that we're getting to 10 to now, and I want to get through to these questions. So if you could just do 30 seconds, please, Grace and Sarah and Lucy, on what you've got.
Me first?
Yes, please.
I'll go first. Yeah, moving forwards, I think I would say 2020 has confirmed for me more than taught me, but really confirmed for me that it's all about the audience. You know, at the end of the day, you can take away absolutely every other part of the industry and we could still have a job as long as we've got people out there who want to listen to it. And I think that it irritates me very much to hear people like Van Morrison, who I know has apparently come out as a COVID truther, kind of going on about how this is going to be the death of live music. I think that is completely impossible. Live music can't die as long as there are people who want to play it and people who want to hear it. And I think, you know, going forwards, it may well be a lot more DIY, but that doesn't scare me. I think that could be a great equalizer. Actually, I think that could bring a lot more of the meritocracy back into it. I think, you know, even if we don't have venues, I think we're still going to have churches, and we're still going to have scout huts, and we might have to sell our own tickets, and we might have to sell box wine in plastic cups for a while. But, you know, all we need is guitars and people, don't we? Do you know what I mean? I think it might look different, but I'm up for the challenge.
Thanks, that's great. I think from PPL's perspective, we will be delivering as close to a normal kind of amount of events and outreach as possible. Whether that's virtual or in real life, we will make it work. And I think also from a more of a personal perspective, I think last year and this year, people are just being kinder to themselves and kinder to other people as well. And if anything, I think 2020 has taught us a lot about being a lot more inclusive and collaborative. And I think that's the three key things that I think I'm looking forward to working more on in 2021, being kinder, more inclusive and more collaborative.
What great things. I think Help Musicians is exactly on those same pages as PPL. We are 100 this year as an organisation and as a charity that supported musicians. So for us, this year's lots more of the same as last year, if not the 98 years before that. I think we will continue to work with our donors, our supporters, our friends of the charity, but fundamentally we exist to support musicians. So we will continue to do that every day of the year. For us, I think as a charity, we will be building a lot more resources. And that's from mental health resources. We're talking a lot about kind of the need, touching on what everyone said about kind of connectivity and community, kind of real regional places where musicians can virtually, physically come together to kind of share their experiences. We're also really keen that through our business advice that I mentioned before, we start to put together some toolkits, some kind of content around maintaining, managing, changing career at this time, and our funds will also be available to support that. And I think as a charity, we're really looking forward to the world where music returns. If 2020 has taught us anything, it is how much music's in all of our hearts and how important it is to us as individuals, as families, as communities of all different kinds. So looking forward to a world where music returns and is at the heart in so many ways. And I think just to also think to say, I think it'll continue to be lots of adapting. I think there'll be lots of.
I really want to get to these questions now because people have been very patient waiting for them. So we'll start with this one. This is from Elise. Thank you, Elise. What's the best streamed gig that you've watched? It does say ever here, but maybe just during the pandemic. I don't know which gig springs to mind straight away as one that, whoa, that was really good. Leonie?
Oh, me? No, ask someone else. I can't think
Grace?
of so many.
I to name check him again, but I really enjoyed Frank Turner's birthday live stream. He did a very high production live stream. It was amazing.
Sarah?
Shout out to AIM for doing AIM Awards and their live streams, Little Sims, and loads of other amazing artists. I think the AIM Awards did amazingly well with their live streams.
Hey, Lucy?
I've really enjoyed regular streams actually from an artist band called The Little Unsaid. Caveat, friend of mine, shout out John, other John, another John. And for me, that was because it reminded me of times where I've been surrounded by friends in a tiny venue that my friend used to run and put on open night gigs, and a mixture of the music, but also seeing people's chats, seeing people's comments. Just, I think it was really early in lockdown, and he's continued to do them since in different permutations, but it just really made me have that sense of connection and being, you know, in lockdown, I would still feel like I was with people.
Okay, we don't feel that you all have to answer the remaining questions now. If you feel it's your area of expertise, dive in. If not, I'll choose somebody. So this one comes from Christina. She says, how has Brexit impacted on top of COVID? Where to start with that one then? Sarah?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question, Dean? You broke up.
Yeah.
Said it.
It's from Christina. She said, how has Brexit impacted on top of COVID? Any indication of how it might in fact impact in terms of what PPL are doing?
Oh, at the moment, not too much in terms of PPL activity, but wider industry, yeah, still in the process of understanding that, really.
Well, there have been reports today, haven't there, about what it means for touring musicians, and I think that's still a very fluid picture. I don't know how that's all going to shake out, really. I think it's kind of very much a breaking news story, so we'll see. But Grace, any indication from a musician how it's going to impact on you?
No. Sorry.
No, I think you know, it is a very live discussion today, and you know, we'll see how it all shapes out. Sorry, Christina, that can't be more specific there. Steve says, when things hopefully return to normal, what changes that people have been forced to make due to COVID will continue? So what good practice that's emerged over the last year might see?
I lost you at the end there again, Dean. I don't know if everyone else did. I was just going to say, from a hygiene perspective, it has struck me as completely crazy that the only thing that we standardly share in gigs, in venues, is microphones. That's what we've shared for years. And it's the bit we all spit on. You know, everybody brings their own guitar and everybody uses a microphone that thousands of people have used before. Nothing, you know, and now I just look at them and they look like absolute teeming germ sticks. So I hope that we all get our own mics.
That's a good one.
Good hygiene. Yeah, that's a good one.
Again, it's about adapting. I think it's kind of lit a fire under the kind of, how do we do something? Let's try something. And I hope that isn't lost. If we ever go back to a normal that we recognise from 18 months ago, I hope it doesn't take away that kind of spirit of innovation and the resilience behind doing that, because I think that's where musicians and creatives excel.
Michael says, what would you like to see done by the government to support musicians and the industry? So what should the government be doing, do you think? And feel free to chip in, anyone.
I think if the government could recognise the necessity of music and live music in society, that would be a great start. That's what I'm going to say. But yeah, it's a necessity for life. So that's my viewpoint. Yeah. And having our backs.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't want to speak from a place of ignorance about this. I'm sure, Lucy, you could probably correct me, but it occurred to me this year that basically like so much of my income is relying on touring, and I know that loads of other people are in the same boat. And it occurred to me that if something had just happened to me this year, if I'd have broken my leg or something, you know, there wouldn't have been any, obviously I've been able to get the self-employment support, and I don't know what sort of, it just made me think differently about insurance and about the idea of kind of, you know, sick pay is not really a thing that I'm aware of for musicians. And I think things like that just kind of like to be recognized, I suppose, as workers. I think so much of the time we're so like, oh, we're so lucky that we get to do this, but actually we're a workforce, and it's really important that we're kind of recognized as workers as well.
I think, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I think our first survey around the time last kind of March, April, when we launched our first round of hardship funding, I might quote this wrong, but I think around 75% of musicians who responded to our survey are freelance. And that's it. Yeah, I would agree. I think the government's kind of recognition around musicians as workers. In the meantime, we do exist, but and we exist, I should say as well, we exist for any health and well-being need, intervention, preventative. So aside from the kind of the pandemic and the impact that's had, yeah, if anyone breaks their leg, we're here.
We're very nearly out of time. It's just absolutely flown by. A question here from Alex, though. This is specifically aimed at you, Leonie. Alex says, what safety procedures, if you can be brief with this, please, I think we could still be here at midnight with the answer to this question, but what safety procedures did you have for audiences to follow specifically about participating, social distancing, mask wearing, etc. when you stage your gig? What sort of thing, how did it differ from a gig in non-COVID times?
It was very different, and I gave out all the health and safety information beforehand. As the gig was ticketed and sold online, every audience member received the health and safety guidelines. So we all had to sit apart unless you were in a very small bubble. You had to sanitize, wearing masks when you're walking around the venue, even though it was outside. The pub was actually open. We were in the bottom of the Old Horse, at the bottom of their garden, and they had their own COVID safety in place. So adhering to all of those and just making sure that everyone was on it. So watching what people were doing. Thankfully, every audience member that came to that event did follow the guidelines. I think everyone was in the same, we need to, you know, it's a special event. We're only allowed out because we're going to be safe. So I think people were very conscious of what was expected to keep health and safety for everyone. What else was there? So from a technical point of view, so our sound engineer was wearing gloves, masks, swapping the microphones over. Every artist had to, you know, bring their own stuff as much as they can. So those things going forward as well, I think, Grace, like, you know, if you're a singer, go and get your own microphone and take it to your next gig, because yeah, thinking about it now, it's really strange. There must be some old crusty mics in some venue somewhere that need to get checked up.
In a venue that I went to in Nottingham, they were baking the microphones. They've got a microphone baker that they put them in between bands.
Nice.
It's like
I think just one per
a UV oven, I think, something like that. Yeah. Right. Just show of hands for this. We're actually out of time. But Bruce says, when do you think we'll get back to normal? I don't know what normal means, but let's think about standing in a sweaty venue, watching music. How many of you, just by show of hands, how many of you think that we'll be back to that by the end of this year?
Hope so.
Middle of next year?
I'm going to do this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll do the same.
I think we do need a crystal ball for that one, don't we? Thank you so much for your questions. Thanks to the panel as well. I'll do a proper thank you in a second. Just something to tell you about here. If you've enjoyed the panel, there's another Cultural Exchanges event happening this week. The Cultural Resilience Debate Space will discuss how Leicester arts organisations have displayed resilience during the pandemic and what the future may hold for them. The event will take place at 12 p.m. on Thursday, the 14th of January. Check the Cultural Exchanges Facebook page for all that information. There will be a feedback survey that will pop up in the comments of the Facebook stream shortly. If you could fill that in, that would be great. In the meantime, I'll say thanks for joining us on this stream. It's been absolutely fascinating. Could have gone on for another hour. And thanks to Grace and to Leonie and to Sarah and to Lucy as well. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to John and the team for hosting it all. Stay safe, and hopefully I will see you for a lemonade in a field sometime. I'm saying July. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.